Welcome to today's Critical Thought. We're getting right into the game footage to talk about skill and RNG when it comes to balance in video games. And we got footage of Enter the Gungeon up, and we got one more game in a few minutes. But when it comes to balancing a title, or what kind of elements you want that game to be based on, skill and RNG are at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. On one end with skill, you're talking about a game that's built around the player being completely in control over their fate, while RNG takes away that control. And in an article I wrote a long time ago about the abstraction of skill in a video game, I talked about action versus abstraction, which is very similar. Be in terms of what kind of audience you're expecting out of your game and what kind of balance you're looking for. If you're playing a skill-based game, something that's 100% focused on the player, somebody doesn't want a random number generator to determine whether or not they have a chance at winning. Likewise, if you're playing a game that is heavily built on RNG and who knows what's going to happen, then you want that to be a major factor. You want each run to be completely different, whether it's having a close win or just completely steamrolling over things. But with the growth of action-based roguelikes, or games that are built on action but are meant to be replayed, like Enter the Gungeon, Rogue Legacy, The Binding of Isaac, and so on, we've seen this merging of the two. And it presents a very interesting quandary when it comes to game balance. And the big balance between the two have to do with what happens when you have games that operate on both kinds of conditions at the same time. So, with Enter the Gungeon, for instance, it is very close in some sense to The Binding of Isaac. Both are shooter-esque kind of games that have that isometric or top-down view. Both feature levels that are procedurally generated from preset rooms, and they both feature an item pool that the game will pull from when it comes to deciding what items you're going to find. Now, Enter the Gungeon goes one step further with having these items be tiered or locked to different rarity chests. Where the games differ is in terms of the impact that RNG has. In The Binding of Isaac, high skill will mitigate a lot of the RNG present. But at the end of the day, though, you are still relying on it to have a huge outcome whether or not you're going to win. If I get really good items in The Binding of Isaac, then that will replace the need for skill. If I give someone Brimstone, the Holy Mantle, and full health, and sit them down and tell them to play the game, chances are they're going to have a very easy time. But with that said, it also means that there is a huge variance in terms of the ways a Binding of Isaac match can play out. One item can dramatically change things for better or worse. Now, with that said, though, another big point about The Binding of Isaac is that it still is reliant on RNG to make things at least doable when we get to the end of the game. You're not going to be beating something like Mega Saiyan or Delirium or even Hush without having really good items dropped. So while skill is a factor, it only goes so far. Now, with Enter the Gungeon, it kind of works on a reverse kind of balance. In the game, it doesn't matter what weapons or items you find if you don't have the skill in the first place. And low-level play of Enter the Gungeon, RNG really isn't a factor. If I give someone the best gun in the game and the best item, but they don't know how to use blanks or dodge effectively, they're not going to win at all. It doesn't matter what I give them. And this way, Enter the Gungeon's skill ceiling is a bit higher compared to The Binding of Isaac. But when we talk about high-level play of Enter the Gungeon, going after the additional challenges, doing the secret rooms, and of course heading down to bullet hell, that's a different story. This is when RNG does become a factor. Because if you don't get blanks or get really good guns, I can't imagine you beating bullet hell with no blanks and your starting weapon. It's just that things are going to be way too much stacked in your favor. And this is when things can be very polarizing about RNG and skill. Is that if the player knows that they're doing everything right, but they're not getting the random numbers that they need, it can become very frustrating to play that game. Now, with that said, though, I'm sure somebody's about to point out down below that RNG, or I'm sorry, that skill at a high enough level can mitigate RNG to some extent. If you watch high level play of Darkest Dungeon or XCOM, that even though these games are built on probability and percent chances, somebody who knows what they're doing and knows how to prepare can mitigate that to some extent. They can still have catastrophic failures, that's just how these games are programmed, but it's far less compared to someone who's just completely relying on RNG. Now, while all this sounds good, I want to talk about what happens when RNG does overstep when it comes to skill, and what that means for the perception of playing the game and balancing it. So what happens when RNG does become more of a factor than skill? And for our next example, this is what happens. This is Skyshine's Bedlam, a tactical strategy game with roguelike elements to it. The balance of the game is built around you leading teams of characters that you upgrade into ever increasingly more dangerous tactical battles with random events that can take or give resources. And to pause it for a quick second, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see the three resources of crude, that's the barrel, meat, that's meat obviously, and of course energy, and that's the top point. Now the thing about Skyshine's Bedlam is that you will only have at max 4 people in your squad for any battle in this game, doesn't matter at what point of the game you're playing. What they do is, as you play the game further, the enemy groups become bigger. Soon you'll go from fighting 2 or 3 guys against your 4 to fighting 5 or 6 to maybe even 7 or 8 against your 4. And at those numbers, the tactical layer kind of falls apart, because it doesn't matter how well you play if you're outnumbered 2 to 1. So what the developers did, what you're seeing right here, is introduce equalizers and special abilities. These are special powers that you can activate and you build your pool over the course of playing. You just saw me nuke the enemies right there. And they cost you varying amounts of your resources. Weaker ones may only cost you a little bit of food or a little bit of crude, while big ones cost you a lot of energy. I'm going to fast forward a little bit more here so you can see this one has even more enemies for us to fight. And they're coming in down below. The problem with this system is that you're basing your entire tactical play on the assumption, or on the hopeful assumption, that your player is keeping to get those resources. So right here, I don't have enough resources to throw out some of my more powerful equalizers. That's the 22 energy and the 26 cost at the bottom of the screen. So now I'm up against, I think this is 5 or 6 against my 4 people. And at this point, I'm just kind of screwed. I kind of even made things worse right there with that barrel explosion. But the point is, the only way to get the resources you need are to have really good events, and if you're playing the game on the arcade setting, you have to manually pick up resources during each battle. But the longer you play a battle, enemies will come in as reinforcements. So you're supposed to, again, pick and choose what's more important to you. But this is the issue. And look at this. We are getting mobbed right now, and there's nothing I can do here. Even if my 4th party member I didn't accidentally get them killed, how am I supposed to beat a group that is surrounding me and also has more health and stats than me? And this is where this idea of a strong positive feedback loop and how it factors into RNG comes into the equation. Because if I start out and I'm doing really, really well in Skyshine's Bedlam, I'm getting a lot of resources, my people are staying alive, that's going to lead to a much better mid to late game. But what happens when that is not the case? And I start having to spend more resources early on, and I'm losing more characters I'm not building up. Then it goes in the opposite direction. And there's not much I can do to get out of that tailspin or that dive. And here's another case of me having to spend resources to try and reacquire crew members, but I'm not going to have enough resources and enough people to effectively survive. So guess what happens? I'm, kind of screwed. And this is what happens when RNG and skill, if the balance is tilted too far in RNG's case, where it doesn't matter how knowledgeable I am on the game or how well I play it, if the behind the scenes numbers just, well, screw me out of any kind of win. And there's nothing I can do to avoid that. Now, one of the more interesting aspects of when we talk about RNG and skill is, of course, the tabletop genre, because it is, of course, built on both. When you play a tabletop game, you obviously need to know the rules and know how to make the best decisions. But on the other hand, you are literally rolling dice to determine whether or not you win and lose, and of course, pick cards from a deck. And my mouse, I'm doing something on screen there, I guess, for added effect here. But the point is that when you play a tabletop game, your knowledge goes a long way in terms of your decision making. And like we said in the previous part, high enough skill can mitigate RNG. But in a game like Skyshine's Bedlam, that is not the case. It doesn't matter how great I am if I'm just being completely overwhelmed and I'm not getting the resources I need. Now, what you're seeing right here, this is one of the lower level battles, so it's 4 against 2. And now that's pretty much easy because this is a numbers based game. Now, another thing to keep in mind about Skyshine's Bedlam's, this is not easy to say, balance, is that the game was originally designed around only having 2 actions per group, meaning that my group of 4, only 2 people can move, such as their group of how many, the same thing. When they rebalanced the game, they changed that around, and I don't think things were fully balanced outside of that. But again, when it comes to the idea of RNG and skill factoring in, you have to be aware of how much both have an impact. Because it doesn't matter how much, if the RNG is too low, then a good player can just get around everything. Likewise, if the RNG is too much, then it doesn't matter how great I am if I'm not getting what I need. And that's when things get very frustrating. And it's why I've kind of stopped playing several roguelike or roguelike inspired games because of that. Because I can do everything to the best of my ability, but if the game's not giving the resources I need or the right items or events, I'm done. So, to begin to wrap things up for today's critical thought, I'm going to get out of full screen here just to make sure we have good time. Yep, that's fine. I'll let things play out while I finish. To begin to wrap up today's talk, when you're trying to balance your game around these 2 completely different forces, you have to give the player the tools they need for both. When we're talking about RNG, we can mean having the ability for a player to gain additional resources, or as we talked about before with the concept of milling, using up resources that you don't need to get what you do need. And then from a skill side, this is when we talk about having various mechanics or elements in place to reward players who know the game, such as being able to stop the enemy from doing something, rewarding really good plays, and just being able to have those additional factors. When we play Darkest Dungeon, for instance, when I play the final 3 levels or the final 3 dungeons of the game, I have a good idea of how to mitigate RNG by bringing the best possible people to counter the situation at hand. When I do the second level of Darkest Dungeon, I know that I want to bring a man-at-arms to counter the very aggressive enemies and get those reposes and shields that I need. But he's not as useful in the first level of Darkest Dungeon, where it's very stress heavy, and I want a party who can either mitigate stress or keep enemies from using their best skills. So again, while I'm dealing with the same percentage chances as you and your friends and anyone else who plays the game, by having that little extra knowledge and skill, I can downplay it to some extent how much RNG factors in. Now, for those of you watching this right now, here's my question for you. Do you prefer RNG heavy games or skill heavy games? And with that said, how much should either factor matter in terms of being able to play through a game? Should RNG be completely all over the place, like in the Bind of Isaac, and I have no idea what's going to happen? Or do you prefer something like Enter the Gungeon, sorry about that, wherein while RNG matters, it still is not going to be a substitute for skill? And can you think of examples of games that have focused on that balance, that have done things right? Let me know in the comments below, but thank you so much for watching today's Critical Thought. If you'd like me to cover a topic in a future piece, let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Before we get to the credits, just a quick shout out to the supporters over on patreon.com/GWBycer. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to check back for our regular streaming, most nights at 9:30, 10 EST, and you'll find a schedule linked down below. For a collection of my writings as well as audio casts on design, you'll find that at game-wisdom.com. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at GWBycer. If you're interested in hanging out and talking about game design topics, we have a Discord channel with the basic tier open to everybody, and that is linked down below as well. If you'd like to support us on Patreon, it is at patreon.com/GWBycer. Your support can help to keep things going and growing, and you can earn rewards such as ad-free versions of our talks, votings for our specific Let's Plays and grab bag streams, and more. But that's it for now. Thanks again for watching. I hope you come back for more great discussions on design here and on GameWisdom.com, where we examine the art and science of games.